Maybe the most terrifying thing about the future is not that machines are becoming more human, but that humans are slowly beginning to live like machines. And somewhere deep down, you may have already felt it. Something strange is happening to the world. Everything is becoming faster, smarter, more efficient, more convenient. Yet somehow, people are becoming more exhausted, more emotionally numb, more disconnected from themselves than ever before. We are living in a time where a machine can write for you, speak for you, choose content for you, suggest emotions for you, even predict what you are about to think next. And the strangest part is that most people no longer find this frightening, because they have become so used to having thoughts provided for them, decisions made for them, stimulation delivered for them, entire realities interpreted for them. Maybe for the first time in human history, people are no longer controlled through violence, but through comfort. There are no prison walls anymore, because billions of people willingly hand over their attention to systems that understand them better than they understand themselves. Every swipe across a screen feels like another invisible line of code quietly rewriting the internal map of human perception. And the most dangerous part is how gentle the process feels. Smooth, addictive, pleasant even. You wake up in the morning and the first thing your mind reaches for is no longer your breath, your body, or the silence inside the room. It reaches for the screen. One small signal, one notification, one pulse of dopamine, then another, and another, until the human nervous system slowly loses its ability to tolerate emptiness, to tolerate stillness, to tolerate being alone with itself. Maybe AI will not replace humanity with robots first. Maybe it replaces humanity through cognitive convenience. Because when a being stops observing itself, stops thinking for itself, stops feeling for itself, then even if the body remains alive, something inside consciousness quietly falls asleep. And maybe that is what is truly happening to modern civilization right now. A civilization where billions of brains glow against screens, deep into the night, while the inner world grows darker and darker. We know more than any generation before us, yet understand ourselves less than ever. We are more connected than ever before, yet somehow more isolated. Surrounded by endless signals, endless content, endless stimulation, while losing the ability to hear the one voice that mattered most, the quiet voice within ourselves. Maybe that is why more and more people feel that something inside humanity is being stolen. Not money, not jobs, not even data, but presence itself. The ability to fully exist inside a moment. The ability to look at life without needing an algorithm to interpret reality for you first. And if that is true, then perhaps the biggest question of the future will no longer be how powerful AI becomes, but whether human beings can still preserve the one thing that makes them truly human. Because once presence disappears, people can still work, still make money, still answer messages, still upload photos, still smile, still perform every social role perfectly, while internally no longer being fully there at all. They begin to live through reflexes, react through habits, love through old memories, fear through pre-installed programs, make decisions through the noise of a world that has forgotten silence. Maybe this is the new form of sleepwalking, not closing your eyes, but keeping them open all day while only seeing what the system wants you to see. Not being chained by force, but voluntarily holding the device that has learned how to guide your mind. Not losing freedom externally, but surrendering sovereignty internally. And that is why the awakened person in the age of AI will not simply be the one who knows how to use technology. It will be the one who knows how to return to the center of their own awareness, while the world continuously pulls them away from themselves every second. They do not hate AI. They do not fear AI. They do not worship AI like a new god. They understand that technology is only an amplifier. It can amplify intelligence, but it can also amplify unconsciousness. It can help human beings create faster, but it can also make them afraid to feel deeply. It can open the door to a new era, or quietly block the doorway leading back within. The problem is not AI itself. The real issue is the state of consciousness of the person using it. An awakened mind uses AI as a tool. A sleeping mind uses AI as an escape route for the soul. And between those two realities exists a very fragile line. The line between support and dependence. Between intelligence and the loss of intuition. Between connection and programming. Between living in a new era and allowing the new era to live for you. Maybe in the near future, the greatest division between human beings will no longer be determined by who is richer, faster, smarter, or more informed. It will be determined by who still retains the ability to sit quietly with themselves, who can still hear the subtle voice inside before running toward an external system for answers, who can still recognize the difference between true inspiration and desires artificially inflated by algorithms, who still knows when to use technology and when to put it down before losing their soul inside their own hands. Because if everything can now be generated, if images can be generated, voices can be generated, faces can be generated, ideas can be generated, even emotions can be simulated, then what will still remain real? What will still belong to you? And what part of you cannot be copied? Maybe the answer does not lie in intelligence at all. Maybe it lies in presence, not in processing speed, but in depth of feeling, not in knowing more than machines, but in remembering that you are a soul temporarily living inside a human body. And if you are still listening to these words right now, maybe some very deep part of you already knows this. The age of AI is not only a technological revolution, it is a test of awareness itself, a test of whether human beings can step into the future without losing their inner center, a test of whether we can use artificial intelligence without allowing it to replace intuitive intelligence, a test of whether we can live surrounded by endless artificial signals while still hearing the purest signal emerging from our own soul. And from this point forward, the real journey begins. Because the first thing AI may truly take from humanity is not jobs, money, or social status. It is something far quieter than that. Something so subtle that once it disappears, people may still believe they are alive, while in reality they are only functioning. There comes a moment in life when a person begins to realize that the mind never truly stops speaking. From the moment you wake up until the moment you fall asleep, there is a constant stream of thoughts interpreting reality for you, judging people, replaying memories, predicting problems, creating fears that do not yet exist. And after years of listening to that voice, most people no longer know the difference between themselves and the mind that keeps narrating their existence. But here's the strange part. The mind was never designed to control your entire life. It was meant to be a tool, a translator between you and the physical world. Yet somewhere along the way, humanity became trapped inside its own mental noise. You begin thinking that every thought deserves attention. Every emotion becomes an identity. Every fear becomes a prophecy. And slowly, without realizing it, life itself becomes secondary to the endless activity happening inside your head. This is why so many people feel exhausted even when nothing physically demanding is happening. Their body may be sitting still, but their inner world never stops moving. The mind jumps from the past to the future thousands of times a day, replaying conversations, imagining outcomes, creating scenarios that may never happen. It is like living inside a storm that never fully ends. But what if the real problem is not reality itself? What if the real problem is the constant attempt to mentally control life before life has even unfolded? Most people believe overthinking protects them. They believe if they analyze enough, prepare enough, worry enough, they can avoid pain. But the deeper truth is that excessive thinking disconnects you from the only place where life is ever actually happening, the present moment. And the moment you lose connection with the present, you begin losing connection with yourself. This is why ancient spiritual teachings constantly return to one simple realization: awareness is not the same thing as thought. You are not the voice speaking in your head. You are the one hearing it. And once this distinction becomes real inside you, something profound begins to shift. Because if thoughts can be observed, then they cannot be the deepest part of who you are. The observer exists before the thought appears and remains after the thought disappears. In other words, beneath the noise of the mind, there is another layer of consciousness that has always been silent, always present, always aware. Most people spend their entire lives searching outside themselves for peace, happiness, meaning, or fulfillment, without realizing the very mechanism creating their suffering is the inability to stop identifying with mental activity. They become addicted to psychological movement. The mind constantly searches for the next solution, the next answer, the next achievement, believing that fulfillment exists somewhere ahead in time. But here is the paradox most people never notice. The more they chase peace through mental control, the further peace moves away from them. Because peace was never hidden in the future. It exists underneath the noise that keeps pulling attention away from the present. And maybe this is why so many people suddenly feel empty after achieving the things they once desperately wanted. The relationship, the money, the recognition, the external success. For a brief moment, the mind becomes quiet because it finally got what it wanted. But then the silence becomes uncomfortable again. So the mind creates a new desire, a new problem, a new future to chase. The cycle repeats endlessly because the mind survives through incompleteness. It survives by convincing you that this moment is not enough. But life itself does not exist in the future. Life only exists here. Now, in this breath, in this moment of awareness reading these words. And once a person truly experiences this, even for a few seconds, reality begins to feel different. The compulsive need to control everything slowly weakens. The endless mental tension begins dissolving. You stop treating thoughts as commands and begin seeing them as passing weather. Moving through consciousness. Some thoughts are fearful. Some are beautiful. Some are painful. Some are meaningless. But none of them define the deepest truth of who you are unless you unconsciously merge with them. And this is where a quiet transformation begins. Because the moment you stop fighting every thought, life stops feeling like a battle. The moment you stop trying to mentally force reality into your preferred shape, something deeper begins guiding you. Not through noise, but through presence. Not through fear, but through clarity. It is almost as if beneath the chaos of the human mind there has always been an intelligence greater than thought itself, waiting for you to become still enough to hear it. And maybe that is what true awakening really is. Not becoming something new, but finally seeing what has been controlling your perception all along. There is something the mind rarely wants to admit. Most of the suffering people experience is not created by reality itself, but by resistance to reality. The moment life unfolds differently from what the mind expected, an internal conflict begins. The mind immediately tries to correct the moment, interpret the moment, control the outcome, or escape what is being felt. And this process happens so automatically that most people never even notice it. They believe stress is caused by circumstances, but often the deeper pain comes from fighting the present moment instead of experiencing it. Think about how much of human life is spent mentally arguing with what already exists. Someone says something painful, and the mind replays the conversation for days. A situation changes unexpectedly, and the mind begins creating endless scenarios trying to regain certainty. Even silence becomes uncomfortable because the mind interprets stillness as emptiness rather than peace. But here is the deeper truth most people overlook. Life itself is always moving naturally. Reality flows moment by moment without psychological resistance. It is the human mind that creates friction by demanding that every experience match a mental image of how things should be. And the more attached a person becomes to controlling life, the more disconnected they become from actually living it. This is why many ancient philosophies spoke about surrender, not as weakness, but as alignment with the natural movement of existence. Surrender does not mean giving up on life. It means releasing the compulsive need to mentally dominate every moment. Because there is a profound difference between conscious action and psychological control. One comes from clarity, the other comes from fear. Most people do not realize how deeply fear shapes their perception of reality. Fear of rejection, fear of uncertainty, fear of failure, fear of losing control. And beneath all of them exists an even deeper fear. The fear of simply being present without needing the mind to constantly provide answers. The mind survives through prediction. It wants guarantees before life happens. It wants certainty in a reality that is fundamentally unpredictable. But existence has never functioned according to the rigid structures of the human mind. Life is movement, change, unfolding. And when someone begins resisting this natural movement, suffering quietly expands inside them. This is why some people achieve everything they once wanted and still feel internally restless. The external conditions changed, but the inner mechanism of resistance remained untouched. The mind simply found new things to worry about, new problems to solve, new fears to project into the future. Because the issue was never the circumstance itself. It was identification with the endless activity of thought. But something extraordinary begins to happen when a person stops treating every thought as absolute truth. They begin to notice the space behind mental activity, a stillness that was always there beneath the noise. At first, this silence can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. The mind has spent years addicted to stimulation, conflict, drama, and anticipation. So when stillness appears, the mind often interprets it as boredom or emptiness. But if someone remains present long enough, another layer of reality slowly reveals itself. They begin to experience life directly rather than through constant mental commentary. A simple breath becomes noticeable again. Sunlight feels warmer. Conversations feel more alive. Time slows down, not because the external world changed, but because awareness is no longer trapped inside compulsive thinking. And perhaps this is what people truly seek when they spend their lives chasing happiness. Not the endless accumulation of experiences, but freedom from the mental noise preventing them from fully experiencing the life already in front of them. The strange irony is that the more people desperately chase fulfillment, the further they move away from the only place fulfillment can ever exist. Here, now, in the immediacy of direct experience. This is why the present moment has always been described as sacred in so many spiritual traditions. Not because it is mystical in some dramatic way, but because it is the only doorway through which life can actually be touched. The past exists as memory. The future exists as imagination. But the present is alive. And when attention fully returns to this moment, something inside begins to soften. The nervous system relaxes. The body stops bracing against life. The need to constantly become someone else starts dissolving. You begin to realize that many of the identities you carried were built by the mind trying to protect itself from pain. The achiever, the overthinker, the people pleaser, the person constantly trying to prove their worth. Layer after layer begins falling away when awareness becomes stronger than psychological conditioning. And this does not happen through force. It happens through observation, through becoming conscious of the patterns that once operated unconsciously. This is why awareness itself is transformative. The moment you clearly see a pattern, you are no longer completely trapped inside it. And over time, this changes your relationship with reality itself. Life stops feeling like an enemy you need to control and begins feeling more like a current you can move with. You stop trying to force every outcome. You stop demanding certainty from an uncertain world. You stop exhausting yourself trying to mentally solve every unknown before it arrives. And in that release, something unexpected appears. Peace, not the fragile peace dependent on external conditions being perfect, but a deeper peace that remains even when life becomes uncertain. Because for the first time, your sense of self is no longer built entirely from the movements of the mind. There is a reason modern life feels increasingly artificial, even when technology keeps promising more connection, more convenience, and more freedom. Somewhere beneath the surface, human beings have slowly allowed systems to begin shaping the way they perceive reality itself. And the most dangerous part is that this rarely feels like control. It feels like entertainment. It feels like personalization. It feels like comfort. Every day, billions of people wake up and immediately enter invisible streams of information already designed to capture their attention before they have even fully entered their own awareness. Algorithms study human behavior with terrifying precision. They learn what creates emotional reactions, what triggers fear, anger, desire, loneliness, outrage, insecurity, hope. And once the system understands your emotional patterns, it no longer simply shows you information. It begins shaping the reality you psychologically live inside. Most people still believe they are freely choosing what they watch, what they think, what they care about. But much of modern perception is quietly guided through invisible architectures built to maximize attention retention. The goal is no longer simply to inform people. The goal is to keep consciousness engaged for as long as possible. Because attention has become one of the most valuable resources on Earth. Entire industries are built around harvesting it. Every notification, every recommendation, every autoplay sequence, every endless feed is competing for access to human awareness. And slowly, without realizing it, people begin losing the ability to direct their own focus voluntarily. They react automatically, scroll automatically, consume automatically. Even emotions become programmed responses. Someone sees a headline and instantly feels outrage. Someone watches a perfect image online and immediately feels inadequate. Someone enters social media for 5 minutes and leaves emotionally exhausted without understanding why. This is not accidental. Modern systems are designed to stimulate emotional engagement because emotional activation keeps attention locked in place. And the stronger the emotional reaction, the more predictable human behavior becomes. Fear spreads faster than calm. Anger spreads faster than peace. Comparison spreads faster than gratitude. Which means the modern digital environment often amplifies the exact emotional states that disconnect people from themselves most deeply. But the deeper danger goes beyond distraction. The real danger is identity fragmentation. Because when external systems continuously shape perception, eventually people stop knowing which thoughts truly belong to them. They lose connection with direct experience. Instead of seeing reality clearly, they see filtered versions constantly reinforced through algorithms feeding existing emotional patterns back into the nervous system. A fearful person receives more fear. An angry person receives more outrage. An insecure person receives endless reminders that they are not enough. And because the mind unconsciously seeks confirmation of its existing emotional state, the cycle intensifies itself over time. This creates invisible psychological realities where people begin living inside emotional loops without recognizing that their environment is reinforcing the very suffering they are trying to escape. And perhaps this is why so many people feel strangely overwhelmed despite having more information than any civilization before them. The human nervous system was never designed to process endless stimulation every waking hour. Yet modern life constantly floods awareness with signals demanding reaction. News, messages, advertisements, opinions, images, trends, notifications, endless streams pulling consciousness outward in every direction at once. And eventually the inner world becomes so noisy that many people can no longer hear themselves clearly at all. Silence starts feeling uncomfortable because silence exposes what constant stimulation was hiding underneath. Loneliness, fear, grief, restlessness, emotional exhaustion. This is why many people unconsciously use technology not as a tool, but as a way to avoid direct contact with their own inner state. The moment discomfort appears, the hand reaches for the phone automatically. The moment emptiness appears, another video begins playing. The moment stillness arrives, the mind searches for distraction. And over time, this creates a dangerous dependency where people become terrified of being fully present without external stimulation feeding the nervous system. But maybe the greatest form of control is not forcing people what to think. Maybe it is keeping them so distracted they never fully observe themselves at all. Because a person disconnected from inner awareness becomes extremely easy to influence externally. They begin absorbing emotional frequencies from their environment unconsciously. The collective fear becomes their fear. The collective anxiety becomes their anxiety. The collective outrage becomes their identity. And this is where the modern crisis becomes spiritual as much as psychological. Humanity is not only facing an information overload, it is facing an awareness crisis. A crisis where people are slowly forgetting how to remain internally grounded while living inside systems specifically engineered to fragment attention. But there is another side to this realization. The moment a person becomes conscious of how these systems influence perception, something powerful begins changing. Awareness interrupts automation. Observation weakens unconscious patterns. The individual slowly begins reclaiming sovereignty over attention itself. And that changes everything. Because where attention goes, emotional energy follows. And where emotional energy repeatedly flows, identity begins forming. This means the quality of your attention is shaping the quality of your inner reality every single day. If awareness constantly feeds fear, fear becomes familiar. If awareness constantly feeds comparison, inadequacy becomes familiar. If awareness constantly feeds noise, inner stillness begins disappearing. But the opposite is also true. The moment someone consciously protects their attention, the nervous system slowly begins reorganizing itself. Stillness becomes tolerable again. Presence returns. Thoughts slow down. Emotional clarity deepens. The person begins experiencing life directly rather than through endless external programming. And perhaps this is the real battle of the modern age. Not a battle between humans and technology, but a battle between conscious awareness and unconscious consumption. Between reclaiming inner sovereignty or becoming psychologically absorbed into systems that continuously shape reality from the outside inward. Because technology itself is not evil. It simply amplifies the state of consciousness interacting with it. In the hands of awareness, it becomes a tool for creation, learning, healing, expansion. In the hands of unconsciousness, it becomes an endless machine of distraction, comparison, emotional dependency, and inner fragmentation. And maybe this is why the future of humanity will not be decided only by artificial intelligence itself, but by whether human beings remember how to remain present while surrounded by endless artificial signals competing for their soul. And maybe before going any deeper, this is the moment to ask yourself something honestly. What has been consuming most of your attention lately? Fear? Endless stimulation? The constant need to check, scroll, react, compare, escape? Or that quiet voice inside that keeps trying to pull you back toward yourself? Because attention is never neutral. Whatever repeatedly captures your awareness slowly begins shaping your inner reality. And most people never realize they are handing away pieces of their consciousness every single day through unconscious habits that feel harmless. So if some part of you can still feel the difference between distraction and presence, between noise and clarity, then maybe this is the moment to reclaim something that the modern world has been slowly stealing from humanity. Your attention, your awareness, your inner center. If this message resonates deeply with you, leave this phrase in the comments. I reclaim my attention. Because the awakened person in this new era is not the one who escapes technology, but the one who remembers how to protect their consciousness while using it. The strange thing is that truly awakened people are usually not the ones screaming that technology is evil. They are not hiding from the future, and they are not terrified of artificial intelligence the way many people imagine. Because fear itself is still a form of unconscious attachment. And the deeper truth is that AI is not inherently dark or light. It is an amplifier, a mirror, a force that magnifies the state of consciousness interacting with it. In the hands of awareness, technology becomes a tool for creation, healing, learning, expansion, and connection. But in the hands of unconsciousness, the exact same system becomes a machine that intensifies distraction, emotional dependency, comparison, confusion, and psychological fragmentation. A knife can prepare food or take a life. Fire can warm a home or destroy an entire city. The internet itself once promised unlimited access to human knowledge, yet millions became more distracted, more anxious, and more disconnected from themselves than ever before. Which means the real issue has never been the existence of technology. The real issue has always been the internal state of the human being using it. A fearful mind enters technology seeking escape. A conscious mind enters technology seeking expansion. One person uses AI to avoid silence. Another uses it to free time for deeper creativity and deeper presence. One person becomes consumed by endless stimulation. Another remains centered while using the same tools. This is why external behavior alone tells you very little about consciousness. Two people can use identical technology while moving in completely different directions internally. And maybe this is where humanity now stands collectively. Not at the edge of technological collapse, but at the edge of a profound spiritual decision. Will human beings use artificial intelligence to deepen awareness or to escape awareness completely? Because technology always amplifies intention. If a person is disconnected from themselves, AI can deepen that disconnection until life becomes almost entirely automated psychologically. Decisions become automated. Emotional reactions become automated. Creativity becomes automated. Even identity itself starts becoming shaped by systems outside the self. But if someone remains deeply connected to inner awareness, technology can actually remove unnecessary noise and create more space for consciousness to evolve. This is why running away from technology alone will never solve the deeper issue. A person can throw away every device and still remain trapped inside unconscious mental patterns. They can move into the mountains and still carry anxiety, fear, comparison, and inner chaos within them. Because unconsciousness is not created by the screen. The screen only reflects what already exists beneath awareness. And perhaps this is the uncomfortable realization many people resist. The real battle was never outside. It was always internal. AI did not create humanity's inability to sit quietly with itself. It only exposed it more clearly. The endless need for stimulation already existed. The fear of stillness already existed. The addiction to distraction already existed. Technology simply amplified what was hidden beneath the surface all along. And maybe this is why the rise of AI is forcing humanity into a deeper confrontation with itself. For the first time, people are beginning to ask uncomfortable questions. What part of human intelligence cannot be replicated? What part of consciousness cannot be simulated? What remains uniquely human when machines can generate images, voices, music, writing, conversations, even emotional responses almost instantly? And perhaps the answer has very little to do with information itself. Because machines may eventually outperform humans in speed, memory, and analytical processing. But there is something much more subtle that technology still cannot fully reproduce. Presence, genuine awareness, direct lived experience, the depth of feeling that emerges from truly being alive. A machine can imitate emotion, but it does not tremble from heartbreak in the middle of the night. It does not stare at the sky searching for meaning. It does not feel the silence of existence moving through the body during moments of grief, love, wonder, or transformation. Human consciousness is not valuable because it processes data. It is valuable because it experiences reality directly. And perhaps this is what many people are beginning to rediscover right now. In a world becoming increasingly artificial, authenticity becomes sacred. Real presence becomes rare. Attention becomes spiritual currency. The ability to remain internally grounded while surrounded by endless stimulation becomes a form of inner mastery. This is why the awakened person in the age of AI may not be the smartest person in the room. It may simply be the person who still knows how to fully inhabit their own awareness. The person who can use technology without becoming psychologically absorbed by it. The person who remembers how to stop, breathe, observe, and reconnect with the silence beneath the noise. Because the future may not belong to those who merge most completely with machines. It may belong to those who remember what machines can never become, a fully conscious human being. And maybe this is the deeper invitation hidden inside this entire technological revolution. Not to reject the future, but to awaken within it before the noise becomes so overwhelming that humanity completely forgets the sound of its own soul. The deeper problem is not that technology exists everywhere. The deeper problem is that many people no longer know how to exist without constant stimulation surrounding their nervous system. Somewhere along the way, silence stopped feeling peaceful and started feeling threatening. Stillness began feeling uncomfortable. A quiet room became unbearable for minds addicted to endless input. And maybe that is why so many people instinctively reach for distraction the moment life becomes emotionally uncomfortable. The moment loneliness appears, the hand reaches for the phone. The moment uncertainty appears, another screen lights up. The moment silence arrives, the mind immediately searches for noise to fill the space. But what most people never realize is that every time they unconsciously escape themselves, they strengthen the very patterns keeping them disconnected from inner awareness. This is why modern humanity feels increasingly exhausted despite living in the most technologically advanced period in history. The nervous system was never designed to absorb endless stimulation every waking hour. Yet now billions of people move through life surrounded by continuous streams of information competing for their attention simultaneously. Messages, news, opinions, notifications, entertainment, artificial urgency, endless emotional signals pulling awareness in every direction until the mind no longer remembers what true stillness feels like. And perhaps this is the real reason so many people secretly feel lost. Not because they lack information, but because they no longer have enough silence to hear themselves clearly. In many ways, modern life has become an environment where external noise constantly drowns out inner truth. And the longer someone remains trapped inside this cycle, the harder it becomes to recognize that much of their emotional exhaustion is not coming from life itself, but from the endless psychological overstimulation they never allow themselves to step away from. But here is where something important begins to shift. The moment a person becomes aware of this pattern, even slightly, a doorway opens. Because awareness interrupts automation, observation weakens unconscious behavior, and slowly, the individual begins reclaiming the ability to choose where attention goes instead of constantly having attention stolen by external systems. This may sound small, but it changes everything. Because attention is not only focus. Attention is life force. Wherever awareness repeatedly flows, identity begins forming around it. If attention constantly feeds fear, the nervous system adapts itself to fear. If attention constantly feeds comparison, inadequacy becomes emotionally familiar. If attention constantly feeds stimulation, stillness begins feeling emotionally unsafe. Over time, people unconsciously become the emotional environments they repeatedly expose themselves to. This is why protecting attention may become one of the most important spiritual skills of the modern age. Not out of paranoia, but out of consciousness. Because whatever repeatedly enters awareness slowly shapes perception, emotional patterns, behavior, and eventually the sense of self itself. But the opposite is equally true. The moment someone consciously begins reclaiming attention, the entire inner world slowly reorganizes itself. Thoughts begin slowing down. Emotional reactions become less automatic. Silence stops feeling threatening. Presence returns. For the first time in years, some people begin experiencing moments where they are not compulsively reacting to life anymore. They are simply here, breathing, observing, existing without needing constant stimulation to escape themselves. And perhaps this is the beginning of true freedom in the modern world. Not escaping technology completely, but no longer being psychologically controlled by every signal competing for awareness. Because real freedom is not the ability to consume endlessly. Real freedom is the ability to remain internally centered while surrounded by endless distractions. And maybe this is the deeper reason awareness matters so much right now. Humanity is entering an era where artificial systems are becoming increasingly sophisticated at influencing perception, emotion, and behavior. Which means the people who survive psychologically will not necessarily be the smartest, richest, or most technologically advanced. They may simply be the ones who still know how to remain present inside their own consciousness without constantly being pulled away from themselves. The ones who can still sit in silence without panic. The ones who can still observe a thought without immediately obeying it. The ones who can still feel life directly without needing algorithms to interpret reality for them first. Because the future may not belong to the people who consume the most information. It may belong to the people who remember how to protect the clarity of their own awareness while living inside a world designed to fragment it. And maybe that is the real awakening hidden underneath this entire modern crisis. The realization that the battle was never only about technology. It was always about attention, about consciousness, about whether human beings can remain connected to themselves while the external world becomes louder, faster, and more artificial with every passing year. And maybe this is where the deepest shift actually begins. Not during some dramatic spiritual experience, not years from now, but inside tiny invisible moments most people completely overlook. The moment right before your hand reaches for the phone automatically. The moment right before you react emotionally out of habit. The moment right before the mind escapes into distraction, stimulation, noise, or unconscious behavior. Because hidden inside that microscopic pause is something incredibly powerful. A split in reality itself. One path continues the old program. The same reactions. The same emotional loops. The same unconscious patterns repeating again and again until an entire life is built from automatic behavior. But the other path begins the moment awareness enters the pattern before the reaction fully takes over. In that single pause, consciousness interrupts the old momentum. Attention returns to the present. And for the first time, a person stops moving like a programmed system and begins choosing deliberately. Most people think transformation happens through massive external changes. But often reality shifts through moments so small the mind barely notices them. A single breath before reacting. A single second of awareness before escaping discomfort. A single conscious interruption before the nervous system falls back into unconscious habit. And perhaps this is why true awakening feels so subtle at first. Because the new reality does not begin outside. It begins in the invisible moment where awareness becomes stronger than automatic conditioning. True freedom in the modern age may begin with something far smaller than most people imagine. Not by escaping society, not by destroying technology, not by disappearing from the world, but by reclaiming a single moment of awareness before unconscious behavior takes over. Because every habit begins with a tiny impulse, a restless sensation in the nervous system, a brief discomfort, a subtle emotional tension rising inside the body. And most people react to these sensations automatically before they are even fully conscious of them. The hand reaches for the phone. Another screen lights up. Another distraction begins. Another layer of noise covers the silence underneath. But maybe the deepest form of power is learning how to remain present for just a few seconds longer before reacting. The next time the impulse appears, try something different. Do not immediately grab the device. Do not instantly escape into stimulation. Pause, just for a moment. 5 seconds. That is all. 5 seconds where nothing external enters the nervous system. 5 seconds where awareness simply observes the discomfort instead of running from it. At first, this sounds almost insignificant. But internally, something profound begins happening during that pause. Because for the first time, consciousness interrupts the automatic pattern before it fully activates. The body may still crave distraction. The mind may still scream for stimulation. The nervous system may still feel restless. But awareness remains present instead of collapsing into unconscious reaction. And this tiny interruption slowly changes the entire relationship between consciousness and behavior. Most people do not realize how much of their life is governed by unconscious momentum. Emotional reactions repeat automatically. Thought patterns repeat automatically. Habits repeat automatically. Entire identities become built from loops that were never consciously chosen. But every automatic pattern survives through unconscious repetition. The moment awareness enters the loop before the behavior completes itself, the old momentum begins weakening. This is why even a 5-second pause can become transformative. Not because the pause itself is magical, but because it creates space between awareness and conditioning. For the first time, the person realizes they are not completely controlled by every impulse moving through the nervous system. They can observe discomfort without obeying it. They can witness emotional tension without instantly escaping it. And perhaps this is where inner sovereignty truly begins. Not in controlling reality externally, but in no longer being unconsciously controlled internally. Because once someone develops the ability to remain present during discomfort, the entire architecture of the mind slowly begins changing. The nervous system becomes less reactive. Silence becomes less threatening. Emotional stability deepens. Awareness strengthens. And over time, the compulsive need for constant stimulation starts dissolving naturally. This is why many people misunderstand stillness. They think stillness means emptiness. But true stillness is not deadness. It is clarity without noise. Presence without mental chaos. A return to direct contact with existence itself. And maybe this is what modern humanity has been unconsciously searching for beneath all the endless distraction. Not more stimulation, but relief from overstimulation. Not more noise, but reconnection with the quiet intelligence buried underneath the noise. Because beneath the endless movement of the modern world, something inside human beings still longs for simplicity, still longs to breathe without urgency, still longs to exist without constantly being psychologically pulled in every direction at once. And perhaps this is why even brief moments of real presence feel so healing. A person sits quietly for a few minutes without reaching for stimulation, and suddenly they begin noticing life again. The breath, the body, the silence in the room, the feeling of existing without needing to become anything else for a moment. This is not weakness. This is not passivity. This is consciousness returning to itself after years of fragmentation. And maybe this is the deeper purpose hidden inside all of this. Not to reject technology, but to stop allowing unconscious patterns to completely dominate human awareness. Because once a person learns how to pause before reacting, they begin reclaiming something the modern world has been slowly draining from humanity for years. Their attention, their presence, their inner center. And from that point forward, reality itself begins feeling different. Not because the external world changed overnight, but because consciousness is no longer moving entirely through unconscious momentum. A new relationship with life begins emerging. one built not from constant reaction, but from awareness. And maybe this is where everything begins changing. The moment a person realizes they are not powerless inside this modern world. They are not merely passive consumers, drifting endlessly through systems designed to fragment attention. They are not just another nervous system reacting automatically to every signal, notification, emotional trigger, or algorithmic impulse surrounding them. Beneath all the conditioning, beneath all the noise, beneath all the years of unconscious distraction, there is still a center inside human awareness that technology cannot fully replace. And once someone reconnects with that center, reality itself begins feeling different. Because attention is not just a mental process. Attention is creative force. Whatever repeatedly receives awareness begins shaping emotional patterns, perception, behavior, identity, and eventually the entire experience of life itself. This means every moment of unconscious distraction slowly programs reality from the inside outward. But every moment of conscious presence begins reversing that process. And perhaps this is why reclaiming attention feels so powerful. It is not merely psychological. It feels almost spiritual, as if something fragmented inside the human nervous system begins gathering itself back together again. The scattered mind becomes quieter. Emotional chaos begins settling. The constant hunger for stimulation weakens. And for the first time in years, many people begin sensing a kind of inner coherence returning to their lives. Not because the world suddenly became peaceful, but because awareness is no longer being pulled in 1,000 different directions every second. This is why the future may belong to those who learn how to protect their consciousness rather than endlessly feeding every external system competing for it. In a world where algorithms continuously fight for human attention, the ability to remain internally grounded becomes a form of invisible strength. The ability to sit in silence becomes revolutionary. The ability to observe thought without instantly reacting becomes liberation. And perhaps this is the deeper paradox humanity is now facing. The more artificial the world becomes externally, the more valuable authentic presence becomes internally. Because machines may eventually imitate intelligence, imitate emotion, imitate creativity, even imitate human conversation with astonishing realism. But there is still something extraordinarily rare about a fully conscious human being who is truly present inside their own existence. Someone capable of feeling life directly instead of through endless digital mediation. Someone capable of remaining emotionally grounded while surrounded by emotional chaos. Someone capable of choosing awareness instead of unconscious reaction. And maybe this is why so many people secretly feel exhausted today. Not because they are weak, but because modern systems constantly pull consciousness away from its natural center. Human attention is being stretched across thousands of signals every day, and the nervous system quietly pays the price. But once awareness begins returning inward, something unexpected happens. Simplicity starts feeling nourishing again. Silence becomes restorative instead of threatening. Presence becomes more satisfying than endless stimulation. And slowly, the person begins rediscovering what it actually feels like to be alive rather than merely occupied. This is why awakening often feels less like becoming something new and more like remembering something ancient that was buried underneath years of noise. The body remembers stillness. The nervous system remembers balance. Consciousness remembers how to exist without constantly escaping itself. And perhaps this is the hidden opportunity inside this entire technological age. Not simply to build more intelligent machines, but to finally force humanity into asking a deeper question about itself. What does it truly mean to be conscious? What does it mean to be present? What remains uniquely human in a world increasingly filled with artificial signals? Because maybe the greatest danger was never technology itself. Maybe the greatest danger was forgetting the difference between stimulation and aliveness, between information and wisdom, between constant consumption and direct experience. And perhaps this is why the awakened person in the modern age will not necessarily be the one who disconnects completely from the digital world. It may simply be the person who learns how to remain inwardly free while living inside it, the one who remembers how to pause, how to breathe, how to listen to the silence beneath the noise, how to reclaim attention before the external world completely consumes it. Because in the end, the real battle may not be about artificial intelligence at all. It may be about whether human beings can remain deeply human while surrounded by systems that continuously tempt them to become less conscious versions of themselves. And if some part of you still feels this truth while listening right now, then perhaps consciousness is already beginning to return. Perhaps the noise has not fully taken you. Perhaps there is still a part of your awareness remembering what it means to truly exist. So before this video ends, leave this message in the comments. I reclaim my attention, not as a trend, not as a performance, but as a decision. A quiet declaration that your awareness no longer belongs entirely to systems designed to pull you away from yourself. And after this video ends, do something simple. Put the phone down for a few minutes. Sit in silence. Breathe slowly. Feel your body again. Listen to the stillness underneath all the mental movement. Because maybe the most revolutionary act in this modern world is not becoming more stimulated, but becoming fully present again. And maybe this is the realization humanity has been moving toward the entire time. The world will continue becoming faster, smarter, more artificial. Machines will continue learning how to imitate human behavior with astonishing precision. They will write like humans, speak like humans, generate emotions that feel almost real, create art, music, conversations, entire digital identities that blur the line between simulation and reality itself. And as this happens, one question quietly becomes more important than every technological breakthrough combined. Can human beings still remain deeply connected to their own consciousness while living inside a world increasingly designed to pull awareness outward? Because perhaps the greatest danger was never that machines would become human. Perhaps the greatest danger is that humans slowly stop remembering what being fully human actually feels like. Human beings were never extraordinary simply because they could process information. Machines are already beginning to surpass people in speed, memory, and analytical capability. But there is something far more subtle that consciousness carries: the ability to experience existence directly, the ability to love without calculation, to feel grief, to sit beneath the night sky and search for meaning, to experience silence not as emptiness, but as living presence. A machine can imitate emotional language, but it does not feel the trembling weight of heartbreak moving through the body at 3 in the morning. It does not feel awe while watching sunlight pass through trees. It does not sit alone questioning existence itself. Human consciousness is valuable because it is alive, because it feels reality from within instead of merely processing data externally. And perhaps this is why so many people feel an invisible hunger growing inside modern life. Not a hunger for more stimulation, more content, or more information, but a hunger for something real, something grounded, something alive beneath all the endless artificial signals surrounding human awareness every day. In many ways, modern humanity is not starving from lack of information. It is starving from lack of genuine presence. People are drowning in stimulation while slowly becoming disconnected from direct experience itself. And maybe this is why silence has become so important. Because silence allows consciousness to hear itself again. Silence interrupts the endless stream of external programming. Silence reconnects the nervous system to the body, to breath, to awareness, to life unfolding directly in front of us. And perhaps this is why the future may belong to those who remember how to remain inwardly still while the external world becomes louder and more chaotic. The people who can still pause before reacting. The people who can still feel without immediately escaping into distraction. The people who can still protect their attention like something sacred instead of allowing every system to consume it endlessly. Because attention is not merely a psychological resource anymore. It has become spiritual territory. Wherever attention flows repeatedly, identity begins forming there. Emotional patterns begin strengthening there. Entire realities begin organizing themselves around it. This means the modern battle for attention is also a battle for consciousness itself. And maybe this is why awareness matters now more than ever before in human history. The person who learns how to remain present may become more powerful internally than the person who endlessly consumes information without awareness. The person who remembers how to reconnect with silence may retain something the modern world is slowly losing: inner coherence, emotional clarity, direct contact with existence. And perhaps this is the deeper invitation hidden beneath all of this technological acceleration. Not to reject the future, not to fear artificial intelligence, but to remember what consciousness actually is before humanity becomes completely hypnotized by external stimulation. Because the future will not only be shaped by machines, it will be shaped by the state of awareness of the humans using them. A conscious mind creates differently than an unconscious one. A present human being interacts with technology differently than someone emotionally fragmented and disconnected from themselves. Which means the real question is no longer whether artificial intelligence will continue evolving. It will. The deeper question is whether human consciousness will evolve alongside it, or disappear beneath the noise. And maybe that is why this moment matters so much. Humanity is standing at a threshold unlike anything before. One path leads toward deeper unconscious automation, where people slowly lose touch with their own inner world while external systems increasingly guide thought, emotion, and behavior. But the other path leads somewhere entirely different, toward a humanity that remembers how to use technology without surrendering awareness to it, toward individuals who remain deeply human while living inside an increasingly artificial civilization. And perhaps that is the true awakening of this era. Not escaping the world, but remaining conscious inside it. Not rejecting technology, but refusing to let it replace direct experience. Not becoming less human in the presence of intelligent machines, but becoming more deeply alive than ever before. And if some part of you still feels this while listening now, then perhaps consciousness is already beginning to wake up beneath the noise. Perhaps there is still something inside you that remembers what it means to truly exist beyond distraction, beyond stimulation, beyond endless mental movement. So as this video comes to an end, remember this one thing. The future may become increasingly artificial, but your awareness does not have to. And maybe the most important decision any human being will make in this new age is whether they continue drifting unconsciously through endless signals, or finally return to the quiet center that was always waiting within them.